Of the day, number 2.
Government notice of motion number 2.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I move government notice of motion number 2 in the name of the Honourable Jerry Brownlee. Mr Speaker, can I pass on to you and the other members of the Speaker's team our best wishes for Christmas season. And of course it is a time when traditionally we do thank those people who support us in our work in politics and in Parliament, and it's only when you go to write down the list that you realise just how much help we have from so many people. So can we thank the Office of the Clerk staff, the Hansard staff, our security staff and messengers who've had their mettle tested occasionally this year, parliamentary librarians, the building services staff, all of our ministerial support and parliamentary services staff who ensure that MPs are fully supported personally, VIP drivers. Can I particularly thank the gardeners around Parliament who do a fantastic job of maintaining the pleasant surroundings of this venerable building, our cleaners, the out-of-office staff working in all of our electorate offices, staff in the ministerial offices, other support staff, our research units, the Copperfield staff. We benefit from the assiduous attention of all of these people who have a feel for the institution and what it requires to make it operate smoothly. And I think we all appreciate, certainly I do, the gentle humour that they use when politicians break the rules or don't turn up or cause some other inconvenience. Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, can I thank the government's coalition partners. Each of them have had their testing times this year, but throughout those testing times, we have maintained between us relationships of respect. We haven't always agreed, but there's always been an openness to discussion, frankness of opinion, and an honesty in the assessments. And it's a tribute to the coalition partners that the government is stable and credible and has maintained a working majority in this House. Not only that, it's actually been able to pass a very substantial amount of progressive legislation through this House with the support of those parties. Mr Speaker, can I also thank the members of the National Party Cabinet and Caucus. If there's one thing that is the same as this time last year, it is that this caucus remains cohesive, united, energetic and forward-looking. That is a tribute both to the MPs and the way they've applied themselves to the task, the privilege of governing, which has been given to us by the New Zealand people. It's also a tribute to the leadership of our Prime Minister, and in his absence, can I thank him for his efforts, his fantastic efforts, first in representing New Zealand overseas, where despite the fact that he's been a Prime Minister for only 5 years, has become one of the senior leaders in the APEC region, well known with a great network of friendships and acquaintances across a range of countries who affect New Zealand's interests, but more particularly for his upbeat and aspirational leadership here in New Zealand. The fact that New Zealanders have come through a recession so positively, with more confidence than they've had in a long time in their ability to handle adversity, but also to deal with the opportunities this country now has, is in no small part due to the leadership style of the Honourable John Key, who is so positive and aspirational about his country, but also about every New Zealander that he meets. And we know that because that's the experience they tell us about when they meet the New Zealand Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, so the government finishes the year in pretty good shape. We're overseeing a stronger economy with more jobs and growing productivity, and that means higher incomes for New Zealanders, a safer community where there are lower crime rates. In the last 2 years, the number of young people going into our court system has dropped by 25%. We're overseeing a quiet revolution in our environmental framework with the freshwater framework, the legislation of our wider economic zone where oil and gas drilling is taking place. We have progressed strongly with the massive rebuild in Christchurch, one of the single biggest challenges that this country and certainly this government has faced. Mr. Speaker, we're particularly pleased with progress in welfare and housing reform because this government is taking more seriously than previous governments the obligation we have to provide more support and for those who need it most to be able to escape welfare dependency and become participants in the wider society. We are changing the passive industrial model of welfare fostered by the previous government to a flexible, personalised model that treats every single person on our welfare rolls with respect, responsibility and aspiration. And the benefits are showing every single day already when people front up to our welfare officers because they are now being treated with the respect that they can participate where previously the government system had written them off. And the change is exemplified by Trevor Mallard's story about the Wainui second-hand dealer. Every beneficiary in New Zealand now who needs a washing machine and qualifies for it gets a new one with guarantees at the same price or slightly more than the second-hand one that the Labor Party gave them. And if I could think of a story that summed it up, I can't think of a story that sums up the difference better, except for the woman that the Minister of Social Development saw crying in the MSD office, not because she was being put upon and hassled, as the opposition alleged, but because she said for the first time in her 7 years as a sickness beneficiary, the government had shown enough interest in her to ring her up and get her to come to the office and tell us what she was capable of so we could help her. And that kind of story is being replicated every day across New Zealand. And Mr. Speaker, alongside that, we're getting rid of the ineffective, wasteful monopoly of the Housing Corporation of New Zealand, one of Labor's favourite state institutions that's failed New Zealanders for decades and wasted billions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, not much has changed in Labor in a year. The leader's still called David and Grant Robertson's still undermining him. That's how it works. And the big test for the opposition was, will they promise to buy back the assets? Now, I'm not sure which is worse. The fact that Labor has been too lazy to take a position consistent with being the most intellectually lazy Labor Party New Zealand has ever had. No new ideas, anchored in 1994, harvesting the best ideas from the 1970s, couldn't even get up and say if they'll do anything. Mr. Cunliffe, yeah, nah. If it's appropriate and there's the money, we might do it. And that was actually worse, I think, than the Greens' effort. Now, I've tried to understand what the Greens had promised. You'd think, having gone to all the trouble of a referendum, gathering the signatures, they'd know what they do with state assets. But they actually have no idea what they're going to do. I can't find Russell's press release, but it's something like, we'll let them not pay the 50 cents and substitute for the number of shares that might have been cheaper, and they give them to the government, and the answer is 63%. So now we know, after all 3 years of debate on asset sales, the answer is the Greens at least have got one, consistent with their higher levels of energy, their better focus on the media, their stronger intellectual capacity, and unfortunately their greater capacity to wreck the economy. Talking to the Greens about the economy is like talking to Jack the Ripper about community safety. But at least they've got a position. Labor don't, and by next Christmas they won't either.
Order. Honourable David Parker.
Mr. Speaker, this debate